tutto risolto, non era neanche un problema. Buonasera e
Welcome. Good evening, everyone. Tonight we have a title which is in line with that of the meeting. I'm very happy to live with you. It's not us who created this title. It is the outcome of an interview, a conversation with Jean Vanier, who was talking about the fact, as you will see from the registered interview, 50 years ago, he decided to live with two cognitive disabled people and lived with them for many years and then created the Harsh organization. And when I asked him, was it something good for you to live with these people? How did you come to understand that this life was a good choice for you? And he answered, because we were happy. So we decided to take this as a title of the conference for tonight. First, I would like to tell you that our guests tonight from the Center for Ethics and Culture at Notre in the United States, Mary O'Callaghan, and Orlando Carter Snead, and then Jean Vanier, who cannot be here, but we have this recorded interview, this video we're going to show you later. And these people, well, they are obviously experts from the theoretical, from the cultural point of view, and in terms of social commitment. But they also have a solid relationship with the meeting. Jean Vanier was here in Rimini many times in the past, and there is constant contact with the meeting. And Professor Orlando Carter Snead here at my left, and Professor Mary O'Callaghan here to my right, of the Center for Ethics and Culture of the University of Notre Dame. Well, this institute has a cooperation with us. So there are also some experts, from some Italian experts, who work there. So it's a continuous cooperation, and these people have developed a friendship. They are sharing their experiences. So I will now introduce our guests. Orlando Carter Snead is the sixth time he is here in meeting, so I do believe that you're all familiar with his work. He's an expert in bioethics, and he's a professor in many different subjects that go from human science to biology to ethics. So these are fundamental themes for the perspective of human reality, and he is also a counselor for governmental and federal institutions, and he has published books and articles. Welcome, Professor Carter Snead. And now let's welcome Professor Mary O'Callaghan, and she's here for the first time today. So it's the beginning of a new friendship. She has a background as a psychologist. She's a professor at the University of Notre Dame in the United States. He has carried out research studies on cognitive disabilities in the United States, particularly with reference to the Down syndrome in terms of studies and research, but she also has a personal experience because she has 5 children, and one of them has Down syndrome. So this is a problem or a theme that she knows personally, firsthand. So, well, let's welcome Professor Mary O'Callaghan. So now, well, the theme of disability will be tackled not as experts or scientists, but more from a cultural point of view, from a social point of view. Why is this theme important? Because, well, when we say you are a good for me, we could talk about someone who's not as we expected them to be. And now we leave the floor to Professor Orlando Carter Snead.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be back in Rimini with our dear friends Emilia Guarnieri and all of those, including the 2,000 volunteers who make the meeting one of the most important and interesting cultural events in the world. I've been coming to the meeting since 2008, and this is the second year of formal collaboration between the meeting and the University of Notre Dame Center for Ethics and Culture, which I have the privilege to serve as director. We are proud and honored to collaborate with our friends at the meeting. When I learned of this year's theme, "You Are a Good for Me," I was first struck by its depth and richness. As Pope Francis wrote in his greeting to the meeting, this theme perfectly captures the profound truth about our identity and the love, solidarity, and reciprocal indebtedness we share with and owe to one another. And reflecting further, it occurred to me that the most fitting topic for exploring this theme is in the context of persons with disabilities. Thus, I would like to examine how the law of public bioethics can teach and reflect the truth that disabled persons, born and unborn, are a good for us, deserving of both our love and our protection. More specifically, I would like to explore the ways in which public bioethics can promote the virtue of misericordia regarding the cognitively disabled unborn child. And let me say at the outset that this is a virtue that is sorely needed in a world that does not grasp the truth that the disabled child is a good for us. The brute fact is that disabled unborn children are routinely targeted for destruction on a massive scale. By way of example, it has been reported that Denmark aims to be free of children with Down syndrome by the year 2030. How will it achieve this goal? By identifying those children in the womb who have Down syndrome and destroying them by abortion. This is a nation with a lethal deficit of misericordia. So my aim this evening is to discuss how the law itself can correct such grave misunderstanding and teach the truth that the disabled child is a good for us to be cherished and protected. To that end, I will proceed in the following way. First, I will offer a brief definition of the virtue of misericordia and suggest at least two important preconditions for its practice. I will next explain briefly the role of law in reflecting and teaching the ethical goods and virtues that animate individual and social actions. Then, I will argue that as currently embodied in American law, public bioethics does not reflect or teach the truth about misericordia and the disabled unborn child. To the contrary, it reflects and teaches dangerous falsehoods about who we are and what we owe to one another, and it obscures rather than clarifies our ability to see the full community of others who are goods for us and to whom we owe duties of care and protection. As such, public bioethics is a threat to misericordia and a threat to the disabled unborn. I will conclude by reflecting briefly on the truth about who we are and what we owe to to one another. I will offer some concrete examples of how the law can promote the virtue of misericordia for the unborn disabled child and reflect the truth that she is a good for us to be embraced and protected. So let me begin with the question of what is misericordia. As philosophers Ralph McInerney and John O'Callaghan have written, misericordia is the virtue that pertains to suffering with others and acting to alleviate their suffering. It looks like justice because it bears upon the good of another, and yet it is different from justice because it springs from the natural friendship that all human beings bear to one another and requires that one take upon oneself the sufferings of other human beings. It is a virtue that flows from the recognition that the other is a natural friend, a good for us, who has a claim on our concern and support. The encounter with our disabled brothers and sisters offers us a profound opportunity to practice this virtue, to suffer with them and to share their burdens, as God himself did, who became incarnate in the person of Christ to suffer with us and to provide for our salvation. There are two necessary preconditions to the practice of misericordia for the unborn child. First, a true moral anthropology, that is, a true understanding of the nature of persons and human flourishing. And two, a well-ordered moral imagination, allowing us to see clearly the full community of persons, despite what blessed, soon-to-be saint Mother Teresa of Calcutta described as disturbing disguises. How then can law, in particular the law of public bioethics, serve to promote the virtue of misericordia and its preconditions? First, it's important to say at the outset that the law itself is an essential tool for the promotion of ethical goods. First, law reflects the goods a society seeks to pursue and the harms it seeks to avoid. In this way, law is the conserved repository of the polity's normative commitments. Law reflects reflects moral norms and conceptions of justice of a given people. Second, for better or worse, law teaches, shapes, and constitutes the shared moral commitments of a society. As one famous American jurist said, law is the omnipresent teacher. And this is particularly true of the species of law known as public bioethics, which is defined as the governance of law, science, and medicine in the name of ethical goods. Now here is the bad news. As currently practiced in both America and in Europe, public bioethics does not promote misericordia for the disabled unborn child. Rather, it inhibits it. Why? Because at present, European and American public bioethics reflect and teach falsehoods about persons and human flourishing, and it obscures rather than clarifies our moral imagination. In other words, public bioethics in America and in Europe suffers from false moral anthropology and myopic moral vision. And a brief reflection on the public bioethics consider first, maybe I'll pause for a second while my translator is gone.
microfono è un bene per me e per tutti noi.
It's not a good.
Quando funziona.
Not a good for me. Okay. Consider first the public bioethics of contraception and assisted reproduction. The American Food and Drug Administration approved oral contraception in 1960, affording revolutionary powers of rational mastery over human procreation. For the first time in history, biotechnology in the form of pharmacology allowed for the reliable separation of sex from procreation. And shortly thereafter, the United States Supreme Court declared a constitutional right to contraception in the name of privacy. Since then, the law has taught that contraception is a mechanism of liberation to harness the sexual faculties as a form of self-expression. This is evident in the advertisements for oral contraception, which, as you can see here, equates the conception, birth, and rearing of children with the hobbies of playing cello or photography. This argument, rooted in autonomy, likewise anchored the recent coercive efforts of the U.S. government to compel religious institutions, including the University of Notre Dame, to act against their strongly held beliefs and facilitate access to contraceptives and abortifacients. The same can be seen in the context of in vitro fertilization, which conferred radical new powers to conceive the living human being outside of the body. Whereas the pill allowed for sex without procreation, IVF allowed for procreation without sex. It opened the door to new forms of instrumentalizing human life, including genetic screening and selection for preferred traits, possibly human cloning, sex selection, and perhaps even the eugenic engineering of designer babies. It made possible the commodification of procreation, including the commercial practice of surrogacy, where babies are often regarded as products to be rejected if defective, as in the case of one couple you see here from Australia, who asked their surrogate to abort the baby that was identified as suffering from Down syndrome. Thanks be to God, the surrogate refused and is raising the baby, whom you see here in this image. The moral anthropology of IVF, as taught and reflected by American public bioethics, is evident in the words of two prominent figures in this domain. First, Professor John Robertson, former chair of the Ethics Committee of the most important professional society for assisted reproduction in America, wrote that the choice to pursue or avoid procreation is essential to self-definition, pursuit of desires, and self-expression. Dr. Gerald Shatton likewise told the United States President's Council on Bioethics that the goal of assisted reproduction is to, quote, help parents realize their dream of a disease-free legacy. These same anthropological principles can be seen in the context of abortion as well. The prominent ethical arguments for abortion include narrow conceptions of personhood, an overbroad understanding of freedom, and a corrupt notion of equality. First, proponents of abortion limit the universe of persons, those with human rights, to those human beings who are currently capable of formulating and pursuing future-directed plans and goals. The unborn child in the womb, or the embryonic human being in the IVF laboratory, do not count as persons with rights, because they do not yet have these active capacities, even though they are living members of our species who will, if allowed to do so, will direct their own development of these capacities in due time. Secondly, abortion proponents argue that women should have the freedom to eliminate the unborn child who is an obstacle to realizing her own chosen economic and social future, thus burdening her on an equal footing with men, putting her on an equal footing with men who are not similarly burdened by an unwanted pregnancy. Such advocates argue that there are no natural obligations, only those one freely embraces. The public bioethics of abortion in America reflects this false and flattened understanding of persons and flourishing. There is a near absolute right to abortion in American law throughout 9 months of pregnancy in the name of liberty and equality. Taking all of these issues together, we see that public bioethics at the beginning of life reflects and teaches an inhuman moral anthropology of radical, expressive individualism. Here, the person is conceived as an atomized, lonely individual, defined solely by his will, and the body is a mere instrument for pursuing the projects of the will. In this way, persons are fundamentally conceived as rational chooser, merely an individual chooser and a consumer of goods and things. The invention and pursuit of projects of the will, unconstrained by nature, is understood to be the highest form of human flourishing. Personal relationships are likewise viewed through this lens. They are deemed instrumental. They take the forms of contracts for mutual benefit, and there are no unchosen obligations. Other wills, other persons defined according to their wills, are encountered as collaborators when that's useful, or perhaps as adversaries and obstacles to be overcome in the pursuit of our projects. Autonomy is the key animating ethical good to which all others are subordinated. Injustice is understood as limitations, including those imposed by nature, on the expression of the unencumbered self. Children and family in this worldview, in this outlook, are seen instrumentally. Children are seen, and family are seen as the expression and embodiment of our will. They are deemed a vessel into which we pour our desires. They are understood to be a product, to be accepted or rejected, depending on their conformity with criteria drawn from our projects. Indeed, the very boundary of the community of persons are defined according to this vision of radical individualism. Those capable of devising and pursuing a future are persons with human rights and the protection of the law. Those who cannot are deemed non-persons who can be used and destroyed for the benefit of others. And not only does public bioethics teach a flawed moral anthropology, the moral anthropology of radical individualism, it also obscures our moral imagination. By privileging the projects of the will over all other goods, it prevents us from seeing the full moral community of persons. Like the man who only searched for his lost keys at night under the lamppost because that's where the light was shining, modern public bioethics leads us to look for our brothers and sisters only among those who have the active capacity for self-creation, self-invention, and the autonomous assertion of the unencumbered self. And this leads to a world in which 90% of our disabled brothers and sisters are killed in the womb, and genetic counseling becomes a lethal and corrupt tool of this destruction. Now, this is a dark picture. It's a dark picture. But the good news is that this false, deformed image of man as radically alone, atomized consumer of things and pursuers of self-invented projects cannot stand when set alongside the true identity of man possessed of inalienable, intrinsic human dignity, living in solidarity with others in a condition of reciprocal indebtedness, with duties towards others, including unchosen duties from whom he is owed the same care. And public bioethics, rightly constituted, can reflect and teach these truths. It can teach that every human being is intrinsically equal in basic dignity, simply because who he or she is as a member of the human family. Each human being is valuable and irreplaceable, regardless of her age, size, race, location, sex, usefulness, or burdensomeness to others, her possession or lack of certain favored physical or mental capacities, or the worth assigned to her by others. And conversely, we understand through this appropriate moral anthropology that it is morally incoherent and indeed a grave injustice to exclude from the circle of persons and the protection of the law those who are immature, small, dependent, or incapable of high-level cognition. Rightly ordered, public bioethics can reflect and teach the truth that the only conception of equality holds that there are no pre-personal or post-personal human beings. All human beings are persons from conception to natural death. Regarding our shared life, public bioethics can teach and reflect that we come into the world situated in relation to others, with connections of kinship to past, present, and future generations. We do not come into the world as radical individuals, unconnected to other members of the human community. We do not emerge as disembodied wills, but as profoundly vulnerable and needy living human organisms. From the beginning, we rely on the beneficence of others for basic survival, and we thus owe a reciprocal duty of care to all members of the human family, including especially the weakest and most vulnerable among us, our children, born and unborn, our elders, and our neighbors. And public bioethics, rightly ordered, can serve as an aid to, rather than a constraint on, our moral imagination. Much injustice in public bioethics is driven by a failure or a refusal to recognize the unseen other as one of us. It is the failure of parents to recognize their child. It is the failure of a doctor to recognize his patient. It's the failure of our society to recognize its own members. It's more radical than the mere failure to recognize and love our neighbor as ourselves. It amounts to the failure to recognize our neighbor as a fellow human being. And just as we fail to see the homeless, the refugee, the hungry, and victims of natural catastrophes, we fail to see our brothers and sisters in the womb, in the laboratory, and among the cognitively disabled. The law can and must be amended to teach these truths about human dignity and the common good, solidarity, and reciprocal indebtedness. It should augment our moral imagination so that we can both see and come to the aid of and suffer with our cognitively disabled brothers and sisters, born and unborn. Let me briefly just state that there are some concrete initiatives in this regard, including legal protections, such as bans on abortion based on genetic discrimination, and genuine informed consent that conveys the humanity and gifts of the cognitively disabled. And the law can also teach and reflect the truth about our cognitively disabled brothers and sisters in the womb by facilitating access to perinatal hospice care, which my friend and colleague Mary O'Callahan will discuss. And finally, the law can provide the background conditions for robust organs of civil society, where we can encounter and even live in community with those suffering from disabilities. And I am, of course, thinking here of communities such as L'Arche, founded by Jean Vanier. In this way, the law can be a tool of Misericordia, both reflecting and teaching the truth to which our own Holy Father regularly bears witness in this year of divine mercy, namely, that our cognitively disabled brothers and sisters, born and unborn, are a good for all of us to be loved and protected. Thank you very much.
Ringrazio il professore
Thank you very much to Professor Carter Snead for being so clear. And he exposed in a very clear way his ideas that are more than ideas, and he explained very well the extent to which mercy gets us closer to truth, and bad bioethics is something that makes us distant from acknowledging the real nature of man. So it was so clear. Thank you very much indeed. I was very much struck by his beautiful words. Thank you very much. Now we can move on, and we are going to continuing by sharing experiences, and the world goes to Professor Mario Callaghan. The floor is yours.
Good evening. It is wonderful to be with you tonight. My husband and I met the movement 25 years ago at Notre Dame in graduate school, and I always feel at home in Seattle. So thank you so much. It's a great honor to be here tonight. This session has been given its theme, its direction, by Jean Vanier's insight into the area of disability. An insight which, as theologian Hans Reinders pointed out, is perhaps singular among those who write about disability, and that emerges not only from abstract theological reflection, but from the lived experience of one who has made his home in community with those with disabilities for 50 years. This idea that we can encounter the truth in friendship in a life lived together is certainly not new. We see it in the very beginning of Christianity in Christ's call to his apostles. And I don't need to tell you that this view of friendship is a particular charism of CL, and that the truth you seek in your friends is not something abstract, but truth incarnate, Christ himself. What is radical about Vanier's proposal is that this friendship is with individuals who might not seem like us, and who in fact may seem off-putting, frightening, offensive, who may not seem even able to reciprocate this friendship. Those with cognitive disabilities, often profound, and all that that entails. It is easy, perhaps, to look for Christ in those friends we are naturally attracted to. Consider Gerard Manley Hopkins' poem, "For Christ plays in 10,000 places, lovely in limbs and lovely in eyes not his, to the Father through the feature of men's faces." Vanier asks us to consider a friendship with those whose limbs, whose eyes, at first glance, may not look as lovely to us. What Vanier is proposing is no less than the radical call of mercy. The mercy Christ showed us when he lived among us and made us his friends, the mercy spoken of by Aquinas as rooted in friendship, the mercy Pope Francis speaks of when he tells the poor, the imprisoned, the sick, "I have come to share in your suffering and make it my own." What began as Vanier's personal merciful response to suffering? He invited several institutionalized, cognitively disabled men to live with him, became, as you may know, the worldwide L'Arche movement. L'Arche creates communities centered around adults with disabilities. Some who have been abandoned, others whose elderly parents can no longer care for them, some who come, like many adults, away from their families voluntarily, seeking a community of friends. Vanier speaks about forming communities based on a new form of the family. These new families are communities composed of those with cognitive disabilities or core members, as well as non-disabled members who choose to live with them. Vanier's work constitutes not so much a theology of disability, but a series of reflections on disability in relation, if you will. He reflects on the fruits of living this life of radical mercy with the disabled in large communities. What I would like to do this evening is consider how Vanier's insights into the contributions and that those with disabilities make in these new families of L'Arche have profound implications for understanding how children with disabilities affect ordinary families. It is possible, if we focus on the beauty of the L'Arche community, to forget that those with disabilities are most often, unless their disability occurs later in life, are most often born or adopted into the old form of the family, that most fundamental of communities. And I say this not to detract from L'Arche communities, which are so vital and necessary, but because today we stand in desperate need of understanding the gifts those with disabilities bring to the family. And indeed, one of Vanier's central themes is that the one who reaches out in friendship to a person with disabilities ends up being the greater recipient of gifts. So much so that Vanier, in Befriending the Stranger, writes that God speaks to the non-disabled who come to L'Arche, saying, I did not call you to L'Arche, first of all, to help others or to prove that you were generous or efficient. I called you because you are poor, just like the ones you came to serve, and because the kingdom of God is promised to the poor. If God calls non-disabled individuals to L'Arche because he wants to enrich their poverty, bring them into his kingdom by living with the mentally impoverished, then it is reasonable to believe that God calls families in this way as well. While not directly willing the suffering associated with disability, he nonetheless allows the disability to be the occasion of a great gift to the family. A gift given not because of merit, but because of our brokenness and need for redemption. It should sadden us then beyond measure that most of the world does not see such children as gifts. With few exceptions, these children are rejected. In some countries, this takes the form of abandonment. For example, the majority of children with Down syndrome in Russia are placed in institutions. But in most Western nations, since the legalization and widespread practice of abortion, this rejection of those with disabilities has taken the very extreme form of elimination. In the U.S., it's estimated that between 70 and 90% of infants diagnosed prenatally are aborted. In Western European countries, abortion rates hold fairly consistently at 90% or higher. Despite these high rates, we have not begun to realize the potential for destruction of life in this area. For example, it's projected that with a new non-invasive blood test for fetal anomalies, the number of genetic tests in the U.S. alone will go from 100,000 per year to 3 million, a 30-fold increase. At the same time, the move to technology such as whole genome sequencing will mean that many more kinds of disorders will be detected prenatally. If the abortion rates of Down syndrome and other disorders remain the same, the corresponding increase in the number of infants killed will be devastating. These advances in prenatal testing are why a country like Denmark can announce a policy of eliminating Down syndrome by the year 2030, not by curing its effects, but simply eliminating all those human persons who might be born with it. To single out and kill children on the basis of a particular feature is a grave injustice, the absolute form of discrimination. But at a time when the world seems deaf to claims of any justice in this realm, Vanier's work, his very life, can perhaps serve as a gentle but powerful call to mercy, to us to extend mercy towards these children, but also to accept the mercy of a gracious God extended to us through these children. This notion that the lives of persons with disabilities are gifts given by a merciful God to enrich our poverty, to heal our brokenness, seemingly imperfect lives shared with us to perfect us, should stir something in our hearts. If Vanier speaks the truth, his words should haunt us. We should be haunted by what we have lost and what we stand to lose by rejecting his children. We should be haunted by the parents, the families who not only continue in their brokenness, but wound themselves further by taking the life of a child. It should not surprise us that women experience more complicated grief after an abortion due to poor prenatal diagnosis and are more prone to post-traumatic stress disorder and other psychiatric disorders when they go through these abortions than other women who abort. But we should also find it hauntingly beautiful, and it should fill us with hope that Christ will come again to meet us in our misery in the person of a very small and fragile child. And this hope should give us courage and help us to encourage others to welcome these children into the hearts of our families. I would like to spend the last portion of my talk reflecting on several themes of Vanier's work to illuminate the way in which children with disabilities, when welcomed into the family, can radically transform parents, can transform families. In Vanier's work, one of his central themes is that of the individual with disability as teacher. Of course, there is no formal instruction, no abstract principles conveyed in a neat and organized manner. The teaching format is lived experience, and learning on our part involves not so much an accumulated body of knowledge, but a conversion of self. Let me be clear that you cannot learn from those with disabilities by simply watching them. And likewise, you cannot see the transformation that happens by simply observing families with such a child from the outside. From the outside, you might not see the good of the child, only the inconvenience or suffering associated with his life. For example, not long ago I read an account of a woman who decided to abort her child after receiving a diagnosis of Down syndrome. The moment of decision for her was watching a child with Down syndrome with his parents eating out at a restaurant. They had to hand feed him a slice of pizza, she wrote, and wipe his face afterwards. This hit home for me. We are weaning my son off a feeding tube, and we often hand feed him, spooning his pureed food into his mouth and wiping his face afterwards. I wondered how many people might have witnessed this in public and decided that a life like my son's was not worth living. I understand how from the outside, from this woman's perspective, our life might look messy, difficult, even unbearable. But my husband and I, my children, we all have the vantage point of a shared life together. And from where we stand, things look pretty good. We know that my son's feeding tube was put in when it became impossible to eat before his open heart surgery. We know that during the surgery, our worst fear was not that he would be dependent on us to feed him for the rest of our lives, but that we would lose him. We hope he can eat independently someday, but in the meantime, feeding him is such a small thing, woven into the overall fabric of our life together, which has so much goodness, so much richness in it, that it might not be apparent from a casual glance at a restaurant. My guess is that if the woman who chose abortion had talked to the family in the restaurant, they would have told her a similar story. To understand the value of those with disabilities in the family, you have to be willing to listen to the accounts of the experiences which come from the hearts of these families. You have to be willing to come and see. What richness has my son brought us? What has he taught us? What in general do children with disabilities teach their families? How do they enrich their lives? First, there is a simple gift of the person. While children with disabilities bring different gifts to their families, Vanier notes that one common feature of such individuals is their ability to waken the hearts of others. He notes that they are not interested in anyone's position or social rank, but they are perceptive about people's hearts. They live in the present moment. And he notes that in the large communities, these individuals are not only the cause of problems, but also the source of friendship and joy. This has been abundantly true in my own family. When anybody is miserable, they seek out my son Tommy for consolation. And his daily question to us is, are you happy? These children also school us in the virtues such as compassion, patience, and self-sacrifice. Research shows, for example, that siblings of children with Down syndrome reported higher levels of empathy and more caregiving activities than were found in typical children. I used this picture of my son Danny with his younger brother Tommy, who has Down syndrome, not because I am proud that this is true for my older son, but because I am humble that it was not my husband and I who taught Danny to be kind, compassionate, patient, self-sacrificing, He developed these virtues as a very young child by simply living with his brother and responding to his needs. I believe this is what St. John Paul II had in mind in Familiaris Consortio when he wrote that each member of the family has the grace and responsibility of building day by day the communion of persons, making the family a school of deeper humanity. He goes on to say that this happens where there is care and love for the little ones, the sick, the aged, where there is mutual service every day, where there is a sharing of goods, of joys, of sorrows. My son Tommy, by the mere fact of his existence, by our common life with him, has made our family a school of deeper humanity. It is clear, however, that this school of humanity that is life with a child with a disability effects greater change than simply fostering the development of a set of virtues. Living with such a child calls us into greater conformity with the very heart of God. To love a child who has physical abnormalities, who has aberrant behaviors, who is outside of the realm of what most people would consider good, normal, or beautiful, is to see the child as God sees him. I have a friend who founded a Catholic perinatal hospice program called Be Not Afraid. Her work brings her into contact with parents of the most fragile children with disabilities, those who might not live through pregnancy or who might live for only a short time after birth. Such disabilities are often accompanied by severe physical malformations and often have, for example, facial features which are difficult to look at. To help parents, she greets visitors at the nurse's station before they enter the hospital room to help them prepare to meet the child. And after describing what the child looks like, she tells them, don't worry. If you don't know how to react, watch the mother. She will be looking at the child the way that God sees that child. If you watch me look at my son, if you watch any mother or father, for that matter, with a child with disability, you will see that truly Christ does play in 10,000 places, lovely in limb and lovely in eyes not his. My son takes my breath away with his beauty, but living with him has also opened my eyes to see the beauty of others like him, those whom the world does not regard as having beauty or value. Even more so, loving such a vulnerable, fragile child with the totality of one's being makes concrete the fact of God's infinite love for each of us, imperfect and weak though we are. And this fact brings us to the very heart of Vanier's work. The paradox that the greatest gift of living with those who are weak is the realization of our own weakness. In a world which values strength and power, how can this idea possibly attract us? What do we have to gain if in reaching out to the weak, accepting a weak child in our family, all we have to gain is knowledge of our own weakness? And the answer is absolutely everything. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German theologian who lost his life for resisting the Nazis, said that everything in our lives depends on the answer to the question, what is the meaning of weakness? Everything depends on our answer because weakness is the place in which we acknowledge our need for Christ. But this is only part of the answer. We recognize our need for Christ in our own weakness. But the good news is, lest we despair, we should find him. We only have to take to heart, whatever you did for one of these least brothers of mine, you did for me. If we accept, as Vanier says, that people with disabilities as the poor present the mystery of Jesus to us, then in welcoming those with disabilities into our lives, we both recognize our need for Christ and find him in the person we welcome. The ultimate gift, then, that the child with a disability brings to the family is no less than mercy incarnate, Christ himself. And that is everything. Thank you.
La ringrazio molto.
I'd really like to thank you, also on behalf of our audience, because well, first of all, for the tribute you rendered to John Vanier, and most of all for the way you have conveyed the theme of the meeting, your personal experience. I have jotted down a few things and would like to share them with you. Since I'm here as a chairman, so I have to say something myself. The disabled brothers and sisters, they can help me. They are good for me. And then in your family, in Vanier, in this welcoming experience, there is a great openness that is not the outcome of a lack of security, of certainty. On the contrary, and as it is included in the theme of the meeting, this is something that is not just theoretical. It is something very practical, and it's something that comes from an experience. This means we can walk hand in hand with the others. So this year's meeting in all different fields, as for instance international problems, Italian politics, and so on, is the offer of a possible journey that we can make together, that can actually be built together, and this contribution is extremely important. And then, well, Mary Callaghan talked about beauty, just like Professor Carter Snead. They both talked about beauty. So this is not something we do because we want to counter what is done by others. This is done because we can recognize the beauty of these disabled children. Was that your son in the picture? He's beautiful. So this is my final summary of the conference. I would like to thank Mary Callaghan because, well, she has already introduced Jean Vanier, and now we have the video with the recorded interview.
Monsieur Vanier, l'Arche est née de votre personnelle rencontre il y a 50 ans.
Signor Vanier, l'Arche è nata dal suo personale incontro.
So the Arche was born with your encounter 50 years ago with Raphael and Philippe, two people with cognitive disability, and you decided to share your life with them. So I think that the title of this year's meeting, You Are Good For Me, can describe this life you've chosen. Yes, it is true. Raphael and Philippe were good for me. I had left the Navy to follow Jesus. And I had the impression that Jesus wanted for me to live with the poor, that was the gospel. Live with, meet, encounter. I met Raphael and Philippe in an institute. Too many people, violence, no kind of activity, 2 dormitories with 40 people each. I was really shocked. There was something that was really violent. Disabled people were considered not important. Well, we need to know that the John's Gospel, in the Gospels by John, the disciples asked Jesus in front of a man who was born blind, who is the sinner? His parents? Who is the cause of this handicap? In ancient times, many thought that disability was a punishment of God and a shame for the parents, and that Well, what I can say is that living with Raphael and Philip was a good for me. They were so happy to leave the institute. My house was small. We would work together in the house. We went shopping together. We cooked together. We ate together. And well, eating together. Jesus says, when you offer food, when you offer a lunch, you should not invite the members of your family, you should not invite the rich, you should not invite your friends. When you offer a good lunch, you should invite the poor, the cripple, the ill, the blind. And you will be very happy. It's a bliss. What is this bliss then? Eating together in the Bible, as well as in the words of Aristotle, means creating a friendship. Thus, he becomes a friend of beggars, because the poor, the crippled, the blind were the beggars at the time of Jesus. And he becomes a friend of the poor. In this way, that's what Jesus tells us. We change. It's extraordinary. I can make the example of an extraordinary man, Francis from Assisi. He was really an extraordinary man. He felt repulsion towards the lepers, but then the Spirit of God led him to live with them. He spent a lot of time, and in the end, when he left it, he said, "There's a new sweetness in my heart and in my soul." Francis from Assisi changed because he became friend with the lepers. He found out that they were wonderful persons. They were suffering. They were humiliated. They were banned from society. They were suffering because they were sent away from their own villages, and they lived alone. But Francis says that becoming friends with the lepers changed his life. So I'd say that the lepers were a good for Francesco, for Francis, as well as Raphael and Philippe were a good for me. A disabled person does not need intellectual operations. They do not talk about politics or economics. What do they need? They need a friend. And this is what Jesus wants. He wants for us to be his friends. I could say that Raphael made me move from my head to my heart, because we can stay in our head for all our lives. With my head, I know I can study theology, I can talk politics, philosophy, and I can teach, but this relationship is more difficult. It's an encounter. I have to wait for you to talk. So it's a moment of communion. So he made me move down from my head to my heart, and made me find out that the only important thing is this relationship. The relationship in which I tell Philip, you are beautiful, you are a son of God, you are important. I like to say you are more important than you think you are, because each of us is a child of God. We can be professors, we can be an important person, we can be like Raphael, or we can be like the lepers, but we're all the children of God, and we're waiting for someone to tell us we're happy to meet you. So the other is a good, but in your life, you probably experienced that the others can also be a problem or a nuisance. So, sometimes, well, maybe often rather than sometimes, the others can be a problem, a big problem. For instance, those that say that disabled people are not valuable, that they are weak, that they need to be rejected. This is something that really blesses me. But when people make me suffer, or people disagree with what I say, well, I need to listen to them anyway. I want to listen to their story, because each of us, we all have our own story. There are people that have different ideas, and they stay in their head, and they do not move down to their heart. This is a problem for me. But we need to understand these people. They have their story, their culture, they have their intellectual identity, and they can reject disabled people. Jesus said, I'm telling you, love your foes. Do good to those who hate you. Pray for those who are your foes. When there are people that are a problem, we need to devote some time to them. We need to understand. I have my experience. Maybe before I came to the Arch, I was like them, but I changed thanks to an experience, thanks to the gospel, thanks to Jesus, thanks to my friends, and so on. So I had the chance to change. Others did not change. We used to have a psychologist here, and we were talking about the importance to look at our fellow human beings with benevolence. And someone said, how can I look with benevolence towards, for instance, terrorists or jihadists? And the psychologist simply answered, did you pray for them? Everyone, even the most difficult people, our foes, they're all children of God. Gandhi taught us a path of non-violence. He taught us to try and understand the others. Do not use violence, and do not say, I know more than you do. Try and understand. And if there are people that reject the disabled, well, I tell them, come and eat with us. You'll make a new discovery. In my life, I have some negative reactions. I'm human. But I want to be a disciple of God, of Jesus. Jesus accepted everyone and loves everyone. His last words were, Father, forgive them because they do not know what they are doing. So as a disciple of God, I need to change. I need to go on. I need to understand. I need to pray. There are so many different things. This aptitude towards welcoming and towards the encounter is part of your personal dimension. But in your everyday life, how do you practice this virtues, this attitude? The Arch needs to have also professionals. We live with very fragile people. For instance, we welcomed here about 40 years ago Ludovico. He's very short. He didn't grow. He has a serious disability. He doesn't talk. He doesn't walk. Well, it took me a lot of time to learn to communicate with him. Ludovico has a look in his eyes that is beautiful, really beautiful. We need gradually to understand that we need to meet the others. That's our life. We eat together. We have workshops. Ludovico has his own activities. Obviously, there are also some medicines. We have doctors. We have psychotherapists. We have many different professionals. But what is most important is that we live together, we eat together, we are happy. The heart of the Arch is the encounter a communion that makes us laugh and cry together. There are workshops, there are different activities, but the very heart of all this is to help the others understand that they are more beautiful than they think they are. Jesus would call the children to him, and the disciples would say, "No, no." But he would reply, "Let the little children come to me. Those who welcome a child, welcome me." Ludovico is 60 years old, but, well, beneath all those years, he has the skills of a child. He is a child in the body of an adult. So we need professionals. We need to take care of him. We need to help him. We need to help all these people so that they can actually flourish. They can actually discover Jesus. And this is extraordinary. Jesus is someone that becomes my friend. And we can call him Jesus, not even Christ or Lord. It's something that goes from one heart to one heart. So this is a very simple life. We work, we laugh. It's important in my community here in Trosley. We're 60 people, and some have very serious disabilities. We now live in a world where everyone seems to be connected to everybody else with the transport network and with the internet. So I'm actually near, but at the same time, we are all building walls. For example, to protect ourselves from refugees and migrants, and we're afraid of the others. What do you think about that? I'm going to tell you a story. A few years ago, I was in Chile because I had to deliver a speech at our movement White Lumière. I wanted to talk about the arch of the people with disabilities. So they came to pick me up at the airport, and they brought me to Santiago. Along the road, there were on the left the bidonvilles of the poor people, whereas on the right there were the big houses of the rich, protected by the military and by the police. Nobody would cross that road. Everyone was afraid. But afraid of what? To get injured? Or not to be able to have a professional career? Or not? Or were they afraid that they would not be loved? Were they afraid of suffering? Were they afraid of refugees, of immigrants? So the fear is there. We are always afraid. We're also afraid of being alone. We need a community. The community is something extraordinary. It means belonging to become. It means belonging to people that love me. We love each other, and we have a common mission. We want to become more human, to discover the importance of forgiveness, to welcome people that we generally do not welcome. Because crossing the road becomes less difficult if we do that together with someone else. So we need to learn that people will know that you're Christians from the love that you have for one another. So that's what a Christian is. This means meeting people, welcoming people. It means that our interior barriers should collapse, just like Francis from Assisi. All his fears disappeared because he discovered that what is different is more beautiful than he thought. What you say concerns the immigration as well. So today's issue about the immigrants, yes, the problems of migration, the relationship to Islam, the problems with the elderly, with Alzheimer, with people in prison. We need time to be able to welcome the others who are different from us, the others I'm afraid of. Fear is there, but if we live together in the community, we're not better, but each of us, we all have our gift. And so we can welcome Ludovic or others, but we do it together. Belonging to become freer, to become free and to overcome my fears. So we need to change ourselves, to have good experiences and to have good teachers. How can we actually follow today to learn how to change? There are some great teachers. I really feel close to the teachers that live with the poor. I think, for instance, about certain orders of nuns. I actually paid visit to nun convents in certain ghettos. Once, someone fired a gun in a ghetto. Well, it didn't mean evil, but he actually fired against the house of the nuns, and he killed a nun, a sweet nun who had devoted her life to black people. There's a Father Joseph Brzezinski who worked with very humble people. Dorothy Day in the United States, who opened up houses for the people on the street. There are so many beautiful people, but our only master is Jesus. Jesus came. He would eat with the sinners, with the prostitutes. He was a friend with everyone. It's a very long road. And I'd say that another great teacher is Pope Francis. He's extraordinary. And he gives us a vision. He asks us to go to our cities, in our societies, and to look for the poorest and to become their friends. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Senza rovinarvi l'appetito.
So we do not think this is the first time you hear this, but I have to tell you that the fundraising campaign for the meeting is going on. I mean, this is something very important. On the basis of the positive experience of last year, we are once again asking you all to contribute to build this place of the meeting. There are many different points where you can make your donations, but please donate only in these official points. You can recognize them because there is the logo, the fundraising campaign, which you see also on the T-shirt of the staff. So thank you. I'd like to thank once again our guests, those who are here, as well as Jean Vanier. I would like to, well, for all of you, enjoy your dinner. And, I really wish you a lot of fun in this interesting place with all its exhibitions. Thank you.